So when you think about the band Green Day, you think about their hit albums like Dookie and American Idiot. And then they have some misunderstood ones like Nimrod, 21st Century Breakdown, Revolution Radio, and Father of All Motherfuckers. Okay, that one might have been a stretch. But there's one album on here that seems to be a lot of fans' favorites that doesn't get enough recognition by the band itself. That makes you wonder why, and what's the story behind this album? Well, the album we're here to talk about and the album in question is 1995's Insomniac, which is the album that followed up the infamous Dookie. And when you have to follow up an album like that, then you definitely have high expectations. This is an album that still to this day has good reviews from critics, and the fans were fond of it, as it seemed like Green Day, after kind of getting the whole sellout label put on them for Dookie, they wanted to kind of go back to being rough and gritty. That Insomniac is just kind of going back to the pop punk roots while also adding some hardcore elements and just straight up punk rock to the record. I mean, the singles in itself are all different. Geek Stink Breath was the first single, which kind of saw them go more raw and dark than they had before. And then when you get to Stuck With Me, it's back to that pop punk fun kind of sound that you may have heard on Dookie. And then when you get to Brain Stew Jaded, things kind of get a little bit different, where Green Day decides to go a little slower, but by the time you get into Jaded and they get to the punk part, you kind of go, see, this is what we like about Green Day. So all in all, what was the problem? As really when you look, the band only plays one song from this record live nowadays, and that is Brain Stew. Sure, they've done some acoustic shows where they've gone back to other songs, but for the most part, that's the one that kind of stays on the live track. But I have to say, there's a lot of deep cuts on here that I feel like deserve to be played live, and the fact that a lot of them haven't, it's kind of a crime. I mean, the kickoff Armitage Shanks, to No Pride, to Bab's Uvula, to Westbound Sign, Tightwad Hill, there's just so many great and forgotten Green Day songs on here that it's just an album that, unless you're a hardcore fan, you don't know much about other than, oh yeah, the song of the guy getting his, teeth fucking, taken out in the music video, that's on here, and the song that's titled Brain Stew is on here, On My Own, Here We Go, I feel like only the casual fans would know that about this record. But all in all, it's a record that I think Green Day kind of underappreciates because they felt forced to go back to what made them popular in the first place, rather than build upon what they had creatively going at the time of Dookie. As when you listen to Dookie,
are you pooping?
There's definitely moments on there where you can say, this isn't really punk rock, or it's not pop punk, they're doing other sounds with it. But with Insomniac, they just decided to be heavier and louder for the sake of, oh, well, people wanted that on Dookie, and there's some people that weren't appreciative of it, so here we go with this one. And once they got to their next album, Nimrod, you can definitely tell that, yeah, the punk rock feel was still there for them, but they were going to be a lot different from then on in. And Insomniac, to many, is the last true Green Day punk record. And, you wouldn't be wrong. I feel like, again, this is an album that kind of just doesn't follow any certain rules. It's kind of its own thing, and they really don't give a shit what you feel about the sound of it in general. But the thing was, nobody really hated this record. I mean, how could it get such good reviews and praise from critics and fans, but yet kind of be so forgotten? Well, as far as I'm concerned, I remember the marketing for this record wasn't as big as Dookie. As you gotta think, back when Dookie was coming out,
that's what she said!
Green Day wasn't necessarily a huge band until the singles were releasing and then the album itself released. With the follow-up, you would think they would have had more, not freedom, but more, ways to be able to promote and all this stuff. I mean, it's 1995, they don't have Twitter or Instagram or anything to promote the record, so they had to get music videos out, they had to go on TV and do interviews, get their stuff played on MTV, or at least try to get their stuff played on MTV, which it did all the time, so there was probably no problem with that. But all in all, I look back at this era and go, this is one that's just kind of weird because it didn't seem like they teased a whole lot of it outside of appearing on TV here and there, and maybe having a song like Geek Stink Breath and Brain Stew feature on music video channels. I don't know if this was an era the band just wanted to get done with because they were kind of like, okay, here's the album that's gonna please the old fans, now please shut the fuck up and let us do our work. Or maybe the record label just was kind of like, let's just get through this one so we can move on to the next, because really, all in all, I don't think Green Day is really satisfied with this album. I mean, Billy Joe Armstrong has said in past interviews that the mixing on this thing could have been done better, however, he would love to re-record it with better mixing, so maybe he doesn't necessarily hate the record, just the way it sounds and the way it's produced in general. But I think a lot of fans would disagree with him because then it loses its raw grittiness if you try to mix it differently than it already is.
He's also said before that this feels like the most honest Green Day record yet, so it seems like Billy Joe Armstrong at this point is kind of back and forth between how much he likes Insomniac and how much he doesn't.
Also around this time, I feel like Green Day wasn't necessarily at the full top that it was. I mean, sure, they stayed on top for a while. By the time Warning came out, people were kind of like, yeah, you know, we're kind of fed up with it. We don't know, this change is weird. But then when American Idiot came out, they were like, oh, they're back on top. We love this band again. But Insomniac wasn't necessarily the start of the collapse. I think they were going in the right direction, and they didn't realize what they had. So they just kind of thought, you know, we don't necessarily want to do this anymore, and now that we're approaching our mid-20s into our 30s, we want to, you know, mature and do different things and show the other inspirations that we have outside of punk rock music. I mean, they grew up with 80s rock and hair metal that, you know, they have admitted to loving over the years, and I guess they wanted to start incorporating that into their sound. And heck, even on Nimrod, there's a ska track that is called King for a Day that is definitely different from a lot of stuff Green Day have done.
This is brilliant, but I like this.
So all in all, Insomniac by Green Day is more of a cult classic nowadays, and I think definitely goes under the misunderstood category for Green Day and their albums, because it's not bad, and heck, I would even say it's probably one of the best that they've ever done, and a lot of people would say this might even be their favorite Green Day album, considering, you know, people talk about Dookie and American Idiot all the time, but Insomniac is one of those hidden gems that a lot of people would recommend to others, and you know what? I don't blame them, because it's got banger after banger after banger, no skips whatsoever, and yet the band has just kind of been like, yeah, you know, we like it, but maybe we just don't want to talk about it that much, because in the end, I think they felt forced to kind of make an album like this after the reception of Dookie was good, but they didn't want to necessarily have the sellout label on them, so they made this quick to kind of take that label off of them, and then they would go to do more things that would proceed to give them the sellout label, but at that point it seemed like they stopped caring and just wanted to do what they wanted to do. So really, without this album, who knows where their creative juices would have went from the past. Would we have even gotten an American Idiot? Who knows? But there's other things surrounding that album that are interesting in itself that I've talked about before. But nonetheless, that's it for me. You can tell me in the comments below, what do you think? And until then, stay safe out there, and I will catch you all in the next one.